Unsolved. JonBenet Ramsey case, another look at the clues. In this particular episode, we're going to look at the clues again, and we're going to see who initially injured JonBenet that ultimately led to her death. Was it John, Patsy, Burke, or an intruder? And so, as we look at each clue, like the strangling with the garrote, that might point to John, or it could point to Patsy, or it could point to Burke. So don't get confused by my assertion that Burke is the guilty party, because he might not have been the one who did the strangling, but he might have done the initial assault on JonBenet, and then the strangling occurred because to cover up his crime. So that happens several times with Burke. I might say this piece of evidence points to Burke, but I don't mean that he actually wrote the ransom note, for example. I just mean that it points to him as being the person that initially hurt JonBenet. First up is the ransom note. And if John or Patsy wrote the ransom note, ironically, it points away from an intruder. Like the point of the ransom note was to deceive the police. But what it did is point to John and Patsy Ramsey. Specifically Patsy, because the way it looks and all its characteristics. It's so far-fetched that an intruder would spend 20 minutes writing a ransom note like this. Furthermore, not taking the body outside of the house, and it not being a ransom, and not calling. And so this clue points to, most likely, Patsy, because it looks like Patsy wrote it. And then secondly, possibly Burke, because Burke might have injured JonBenet, and therefore Patsy, and possibly Patsy and John, wrote the ransom note. And then lastly, what I feel is John wrote this ransom note because he is the one that initially injured JonBenet. So the ransom note points to Patsy, then Burke, then John. Next we have the garrote, and I think it points, to be fair, most likely to an intruder. Again, we're just looking at this specific clue. We're not looking at all the clues combined. And so it's very hard to believe that John Ramsey would strangle his daughter to death, or Patsy would do this. Now, surprisingly, this, I would say second, this points to Burke, because if JonBenet was knocked unconscious and thought to be dead or brain dead, then there is a reason why John or Patsy would strangle JonBenet to death, to cover up for Burke. For example, if JonBenet was out unconscious for a long time and there looked like there's no hope, and they didn't want to call 911 because Burke is why she was out, then they might resort to strangling her. And then next, I would say John is guilty because he knows how to tie one of those knots on that paintbrush handle. And if he was molesting JonBenet, he would have a reason to strangle her and kill her. So the Garrote would go with the intruder, and then John covering up for Patsy or Burke. Next is the most controversial, is the skull fracture. And it depends on how this occurred. And so my opinion is probably going to differ than many. But I believe that she definitely was strangled and then hit in the head hard with some metal object after being strangled, because there would have been blood all over the place if she was hit in the head without being strangled. The strangling cut the blood circulation and blood pressure to her skull or her head down, and therefore there wasn't a whole lot of bleeding. So with that in mind, this points to either an intruder or John Ramsey striking JonBenet in the head. And I believe this was done by the intruder or John because of the noises and the grotesque situation is why she was hit in the head. So this clue, in my opinion, points to either an intruder doing this or to John Ramsey doing this, and points away from Patsy doing this or being responsible for this, and for Burke, because the whole reason people think Burke is because he hit JonBenet in the head and therefore they strangled her. Next is the most revealing clue of them all, the bowl of pineapple. Many people don't give this clue a lot of consideration, but it's overwhelmingly important. First, it pretty much eliminates an intruder for multiple reasons. First is how outrageous that would be that an intruder fed JonBenet pineapple. But JonBenet didn't die after eating the pineapple right away. She was alive for another hour and a half because the pineapple went through her stomach, passed through her stomach. So JonBenet wasn't stun-gunned or unconscious. And an intruder would have had to have been in the house for multiple hours, writing the ransom note, feeding her the pineapple, waiting until whenever to kill her. So here's what I think happened. Burke, on his own, got out this pineapple because he was hungry, and JonBenet was up at that time, and they had this. Or Burke asked John or Patsy, "Hey, I'm hungry, can I get something to eat?" And they said, "Yeah, sure." And they didn't think much about it. And that's why they forgot about it being out. You can see in a map or the floor plan of the Ramsey's house that this dining room is kind of off to the side and is probably not used much. They would use the kitchen or the breakfast dining room to eat. And so it just got put to the side and everybody forgot about it. But the crime scene investigators. So this clue points to most likely John and Patsy covering up something and them lying to the police. And probably when they got home that JonBenet wasn't asleep, as they both testified to. But it also can point to one or the other. It could point that John was up that night, Patsy was in bed, and Burke got out the pineapple and the glass. of tea. And the last clue that I mentioned in this video is JonBenet being found in the basement wine cellar in the white blanket with her wrist tied and duct tape placed on her mouth. This shows that it was either John or Patsy that put her inside the wine cellar. Most likely Patsy, because JonBenet was wrapped in this white blanket, according to John. And so it shows some kind of care for JonBenet. But it also could be done by John, because he was going to move the body. And so she was wrapped in the white blanket to try not to be gross, but no fluids or anything would get on John. So in conclusion, what person is included in every scenario as a possibility? And it's John Ramsey. At first I thought it was going to be Burke and covering up for Burke, but there's two things that kind of eliminate Burke. One, that if JonBenet was strangled and then hit in the head, that would eliminate Burke. And also the bowl of pineapple kind of eliminates Burke, because it was an hour or more after the pineapple was eaten by JonBenet that she passed away. Now John fits every scenario, and the one I think that's most difficult to believe is him writing the ransom note on his own. Most people don't believe that, but I do. And the reason that I believe that he did that is there's several things in the ransom note that prove or show that Patsy didn't write it. She doesn't write her numbers that way. And all the focus went on Patsy writing the ransom note. And so that was tested multiple times by the police, and they still could never nail her down to writing it. I believe John Ramsey had the motive to kill JonBenet, and he has the motive to write the ransom note. For example, why would Patsy talk about a big attaché and going to the bank and all the details in the ransom note? She wouldn't have put that in. But John, he's putting that in so he can dispose of JonBenet's body in the morning. So he has a reason to leave. He has a reason not to call the police. And what messed up his whole plan was Patsy calling 911 because she was uncontrollable at that moment. Hey, it's me, Nancy Drew, the great crime detective, asking please subscribe to my channel, the Nancy Drew channel, if you enjoyed it and you haven't subscribed already. Thank you. Well, this ends this episode of Unsolved. And if you disagree with me, please leave a comment. I tried to be fair about the clues, and you can draw your own conclusion at the end. But that's the way I see it. So I'll see you the next time. Tomorrow night, the Zodiac Killer case with a lot of detail. See ya.